Brady was pissed. His senior year at college had just blown up. Thanks to the corona panic, he'd been summarily ordered to gather up all of his worldly possessions and clear out of his dormitory by the end of the week. Information about online classes and would come later, and graduation ceremonies were up in the air. To make matters worse, 2 of his wimpy frat buddies had bailed out on their planned trip to Florida for spring break. This would be his last chance to blow off some steam and get a killer tan before he joined the rat race, and he wasn't about to let some Chinese virus mess with his plans. So he loaded all of his shit into his beat-up Camry and hit the road. The reader can probably anticipate what happened next. Brady was captured on camera by a news crew covering the crowded Florida beaches, and his asinine "if I get corona, I get corona, I'm not gonna let it stop me from partying" quote went viral. When Brady finally headed back home to Ohio, after shagging 2 chicks in their motel rooms and downing endless cases of Corona, the beer, he was feeling perfectly fine. It wasn't until he'd spent almost a week playing Fortnite in his parents' basement that he started to come down with something. Sitting down to breakfast, he realized that the thought of eating made him nauseous. He went back to bed and slept for a few hours, but when he woke up, he'd only gotten worse. His chest felt tight, and he had a dry cough that just wouldn't quit. He found a thermometer in his parents' medicine cabinet, held it under his tongue for a minute and read the result, 102. "Fuck," he said to himself as he crawled back into bed. After 4 days of raging fever and feeling sore all over, he realized that he was sicker than he'd ever been in his life. He had a dry cough that shook him so hard that his back hurt. Fighting for breath, he asked his shocked mother to drive him to the nearest emergency room, where he was examined and sent to an isolation ward. As doctors waited for the results of a test for the coronavirus, they administered a CT scan of his lungs, which revealed telltale fuzzy spots caused by fluid accumulating where his immune system was fighting World War III against the virus. Not only did he have COVID-19, it had led to an intense and dangerous pneumonia called acute respiratory distress syndrome. With all the regular beds already occupied by the many COVID-19 sufferers, he was given a cot in a room alongside 5 other patients. Doctors put him on an intravenous drip to supply his body with nutrients and fluids as well as antiviral medicine. Within a day of his arrival, his condition deteriorated. He threw up frequently and started to hallucinate. His heart rate slowed to 50 beats a minute. When a patient in the next room died, doctors took the ventilator he was using and put it on him. By the time a nurse threaded an endotracheal tube down his throat, he was barely conscious of the sensation of it snaking deeper and deeper toward his lungs. He just lay there as she placed tape over his mouth to keep the tube in place. Brady was crashing. His immune system had flung itself into a cytokine storm and overdrive of such intensity that it was no longer fighting just the viral infection but his body's own cells as well. White blood cells stormed his lungs, destroying tissue. Fluid filled the tiny alveolar sacs that normally let the blood absorb oxygen. Effectively, he was drowning even with the ventilator pumping oxygen-enriched air into his lungs. The doctors huddled with his distraught parents, both of whom would miraculously test negative, thanks to Brady's isolated playing of Fortnite 24/7 in their basement. Unless they agreed to let the doctors try an experimental cure, the intensity of his body's immune response was such that under its onslaught, his organs would start shutting down. He was fluttering on the edge between life and death. Lying on his cot, he half heard as the doctors told him that his parents had approved a radical therapy which was the only chance to save his life. Something about a combination of blood plasma taken from a woman who had survived the virus, hormones to offset the testosterone in his system since the disease attacked men much more strongly than women for some reason, and atrazine, which was among a long list of experimental drugs which the FDA had approved for critically ill patients at the behest of the president. After they administered the plasma, drugs and hormones, the doctors hooked him up to a machine that took over the work of his heart and lungs to keep him alive until his body had a chance to respond. With that, he was flooded with an overwhelming sense of calm. He sensed that his body was changing in some way, and that the worst of the danger was over. The viral attack seemed to be beaten, his body's immune system began to pull back, and he began the slow, painstaking journey to full recovery. After a few weeks, the doctors removed the tube from his throat and wheeled away the ventilator. His appetite came back and the color returned to his cheeks. And something far more shocking had happened to him. His first inkling of what that was came when he awoke one morning to find his mother standing at his bedside, staring at him awkwardly. He'd been moved by then into a private room, and the catheters to relieve his bodily functions had just been removed. His mother knew that she could put off telling him no longer. At least the nurses had shaved his face and trimmed his unruly hair. "Good morning, dear. You look so much better," she said. "Where am I?" "You're in the hospital, dear." His memory started to come back. "How long have I been in here?" "You've been under heavy sedation for over 2 months." "Holy shit! 2 months. What happened to me? Did I get the corona?" "Yes, dear, you got the coronavirus. We thought we were going to lose you several times, but the doctors performed a miracle and you're going to be just fine." He shook his head and stretched. Something felt strange. "When can I get out of here?" "The doctors say you can be released in a few days, but they want to talk to you first. There have been some side effects from your medication that they need to tell you about." She discussed this, at length, with the hospital staff. There was no way she could bring herself to tell her son what had happened to him, and her husband had been under sedation himself ever since he heard the news. "What kind of side effects?" he asked as 2 doctors, a man and a woman, walked into the room as if on cue. His mother gratefully backed away from the bedside and braced herself for what was to come. "Good morning," the male doctor said nervously. He cleared his throat. "How are you feeling?" Brady could tell that something was wrong, terribly wrong. The doctor's hands were quivering and his voice was shaking. "You tell me," he said. The female doctor stepped forward, and she had the sweetest smile on her face. "Brady, we have good news and bad news." "Tell me the good news first." "The good news is that you are going to make a complete recovery, and you should be able to leave the hospital in a day or so." Brady exhaled heavily. "Phew. So what's the bad news?" "Let me try to explain this to you in language you'll understand. When the coronavirus pandemic reached epic proportions, the FDA waived their long-standing procedures and allowed physicians to administer experimental therapies to patients who were near death. You were pretty far gone, Brady, and after consulting with your parents," his mother hung her head, "we administered a cocktail of medicines which had never been tried before in combination. First, we gave you blood serum from a woman who had previously been infected with coronavirus and survived. For reasons which are still unknown to us, females have a much higher survival rate, and it was our hope that the serum might contain antibodies which would help to combat the disease. We combined this with hormone therapy, for the same reason since the presence of testosterone seems to make the body more vulnerable to attack, we flooded your system with androgens to suppress its production, and estrogen to counteract it. And finally, we injected you with a drug which has never been administered to humans before, atrazine. Atrazine is primarily used in agriculture, but it has been known to suppress male sex characteristics in amphibians." Here, the doctor was holding back. Atrazine was known to trigger the transformation of male frogs into females, and the doctors had theorized that if used in combination with female hormones and blood serum, it might trick the coronavirus into thinking that it was inside a female body. As it turned out, the doctors had succeeded beyond their wildest expectations. All of this was lost on Brady as he tried to follow along. "So, what's the bad news?" he asked again. The male doctor finally screwed up his courage and delivered the fateful news. "The bad news is that you have turned into a woman." There was dead silence as Brady tried to process what he had just been told. Hesitantly, he lifted the sheets covering his body and was stunned to discover two female breasts pressing against his hospital gown. He wasn't overly endowed, although his breasts would continue to blossom under the continued effects of the hormones, but they were definitely boobs. With shaking hands, he lifted up the hem of his gown and stared in shock at the place between his legs. His penis and testicles were gone, replaced by an unmistakable female vagina. "Holy shit, I've got tits and a vagina," he shouted. "What the hell did you do to me? Give me my balls back. Please, give me my penis back," he cried over and over as his mother broke down and wept. One of the doctors called for an orderly to help them in case Brady tried to hurt himself, but that wasn't necessary. As the grim reality sank in, he curled up into a ball, cried himself to sleep. Brady may have recovered completely from the effects of the coronavirus, but his mental state was another matter. At one point, orderlies had to strap him into his bed when he swore that he was going to kill himself. He blasted the doctors for ruining his life whenever they entered the room, and he spent hours staring at the ceiling when he wasn't exhausting himself with crying jags. When his mother finally brought his poor father into the room to try to comfort him, it unfortunately coincided with his first menstrual period, and he blistered them both with a litany of curses which echoed down the halls of the hospital as they hurried away. Eventually, he settled into a deep, unreachable funk. A team of psychiatrists was brought in, with the hope that they might be able to bring him around. For despite how Brady might feel, the fact remained that the doctors had discovered a promising cure for the dreaded coronavirus, if only men might react more positively to the side effect of total feminization and gender change. Their approach was subtlety itself. Every time Brady dozed off, feminization hypnosis recordings seductively voiced by an Indian guru were piped into his room, taking him inexorably through the 7 steps of feminization: learn to relax, freedom from fears and blocks, desire of feminization, how to feminization, past feminization, switchover feminization, and resolving mismatch with conscience. And all the while, they kept him on a steady diet of female hormones. Whether it was the therapy, the softening effects of estrogen, or just sheer boredom from being cooped up in his hospital bed, on a lovely spring morning Brady decided that life was worth living. It wasn't the life that he ever would have wanted for himself, but it was the only life he had. His understandable embarrassment over his predicament was gradually replaced by a desire to experience life in the new body that fate had given him. He could tell from looking at himself in the mirror that he was going to be a pretty girl, so when curiosity finally got the better of him, he asked his mother to help him. She was unbelieving at first, but thrilled at the same time, and when she suggested was that he consider giving himself a new name, he surprised her by saying, "Call me Brandy." Brandy came back home the next day, with no fanfare, although the doctors hoped that once she settled into her new persona, she might become a spokesperson for the new cure they discovered. Her mother had been busy buying clothes, makeup, and accessories for her, although Brandy attracted no attention when she left the hospital in jeans, a sweatshirt, and sneakers. For some reason, she had no interest in playing Fortnite, and when she told her mother that she was ready to start learning how to be a girl, her new life finally began. First, her mother instructed her to take a nice, hot bubble bath, one of the joys of being a woman, and while you're at it, why don't you try shaving your legs and underarms? After Brandy settled herself into the swirling suds, she picked up the daisy razor with a sigh and began what was to become a lifetime ritual of removing all of the hair from her new body. When she finally emerged from the tub, her mother was there with a plush towel, and after showing Brandy how to pat herself dry, she helped her tie the towel around her body, just covering her emerging breasts. Now for moisturizer, her mother said, showing her how to smooth the rich cream over her arms, legs, shoulders, everywhere. Next, her mother had her bend down over the sink so she could shampoo and condition her hair, which had grown just long enough to style into a bob. It was tedious, but after Brandy passively let her mother rinse it out, she learned how to fold another towel into a turban and tie it on top of her head. Okay, while your hair is drying, let's get to work on your nails and makeup, her mother said, and by now Brandy was beginning to get an idea of just how much maintenance was involved in being a woman. Her mother sat her down on a little stool by her vanity and showed her how to file her nails, which had grown quite long in the hospital, down to dainty, feminine ovals and coat them with quick-dry polish. We'll go out for Manus and Pedis soon, but this will hold you for now. By then her hair was halfway dry, so her mother removed the towel, handed her a blow dryer and patiently showed her how to brush and style it into an attractive bob. Her first makeup lesson was a crash course in the essentials: moisturizer, liquid foundation smoothed in with a little sponge, brow pencil, after a painful interruption to thin them out with tweezers, followed by eyeliner. Her mother made it look so easy, a bit of shadow on her eyelids and mascara on her lashes. After she put on a little lipstick, Brandy was feeling totally overwhelmed when she saw her feminine face in the mirror for the first time. Her mother finally broke the spell. Okay, sweetheart, it's time to get you dressed, she said, and Brandy reluctantly followed her into Brady's old bedroom. All of Brady's old clothes had been removed from the dresser drawers and closet, and when her mother handed her a pair of silky panties, she hesitated for a moment before pulling them up her legs. They fit perfectly, and before she had time to think about it, her mother gently unwrapped her towel and handed over her first brassiere. Brandy sat down on a corner of the bed and began to weep. "Oh, Mom, I don't know how I'm going to be able to go through with this. It's all so weird, and so wrong. I just want to go back to being a guy again," she wailed. Her mother put her arm around her and hugged her. "I know, dear, this must be so hard for you. But it's not wrong, and it's who you are now. Your father and I love you with all our hearts, and we were so afraid that we were going to lose you. I'm sorry that this happened to you, but I'll never be sorry that we tried to save your life, and now that you've come back to us, we just want you to be happy. I know, Mom, but what if I can't make it as a girl? Everyone's going to laugh at me." "Oh, honey, that's the least of your problems." Brandy wiped her eyes and looked at her quizzically. "You've seen your face in the mirror. You make a very pretty girl, and you're going to be a beautiful woman." With that, she eased the brassiere over Brandy's breasts, showed her how to put her arms through the straps, and helped her fasten the snaps behind her back. "That will get easier every time you do it," she said. "Now, let's see how you look in a dress." "I don't think I'm ready for that. Can't I just put on jeans tonight?" "Brandy, I know you've lost track of the calendar, but tonight is your father's birthday, and I think we girls should surprise him by dolling ourselves up and making him take us to his favorite restaurant," she winked. "Dad's birthday? I'm so sorry, I forgot." "You forgot it every year when you were a boy," she smiled. With that, she got up and walked to the closet, sifting through the hangers. "I've only gotten you a few things to start with. Let's try this," she said, selecting a floral dress with short sleeves. She also dug a half slip and a package of pantyhose out of one of the dresser drawers and laid them on the bed. He sat there shivering as he looked at them. Do I really have to? He felt like a little girl. Sooner or later, if you're going to be a woman, so let's get it over with. I'll let you in on a little secret, girls' clothes are fun to wear. Boys never get to know about that. Here, she said as she removed the pantyhose from the package and sat down beside her. There's nothing to it. Lift up your left leg, that's right, now watch as I slip them over your toes, she said as she started to ease them up her leg, now the other foot, there you go, now pull them slowly up to your waist, that's right, now do a deep knee bend to snug them tight, atta girl. She resigned herself to defeat as she stood there staring at her suddenly glamorous legs, and when her mother instructed Brandy to step into the half-slip, she did so without protest. The sight of her silky legs peeking out from under the lacy hem of her slip was beyond weird. Okay, now for the piece de resistance, she said as she held open Brandy's dress and told her to step into it. After she did, she zipped Brandy up in the back, and the snug feeling of the dress against her breasts, combined with the lighter-than-air feeling of the dress swirling around her nylon knees, actually made Brandy gasp. Come see how you look, her mother said, and Brandy was stunned when they walked over to a full-length mirror. Oh Mom, I can't believe it's really me. I know dear, I can't believe it either, but you're a gorgeous girl now. Your father isn't going to believe it either, she added as she rummaged around the closet floor and returned with a pair of flats. I don't think you're quite ready for heels, but these will be cute, she said. Brandy stepped into them and stood there in a trance while her mother draped a necklace over her neck and spritzed her with cologne. With that, she handed Brandy a purse and asked, Are you ready to face the world?